Y'all, I don't know if we're in a different dimension or if this is even real life, but it doesn't matter because the special episode of Dharma Drops podcast with Annie Carpenter is here. A big thanks goes out to Annie for taking the time to sit down and chat and be on the podcast. And as always, so much gratitude to those of you who listen to the podcast week after week and listen to my shenanigans and ramblings and musings. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to whatever app you're listening to this podcast on. And here we go. Please enjoy this special episode of Dharma Drops with Annie Carpenter. This is Dharma Drops with your host, Rebecca Warfield. This podcast is a little bit about yoga, a little bit about life, and a little bit about whatever. And just as a warning, this podcast is unscripted, so that means I might regret a few things that I say. But hey, maybe I'll say some pretty awesome stuff too. Remember, these are musings, not truths. Buckle up, giddy up, because here we go. Annie, I'm very tired. Thank you so much for being here, guys. This is your host of Dharma Drops podcast, Rebecca Warfield, and I'm both here and very tired with Annie Carpenter. How are you, Annie?
Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Yes, of course. So before we get into anything else, I feel like I should first just send out a big thank you to your student and my dear friend Angela, one who brought you here, but also introduced me to your teachings. It's kind of interesting because yesterday when you were talking in the very, very beginning of class, because for those of you listening, Annie is here at Longwave Yoga doing a full weekend workshop in SmartFLOW Yoga. She had, or you had mentioned, sometimes we get too deep into the practice. And I think at that time you were talking about maybe asana, but I had gone just down this path in my yoga practice and I felt really worn out and not really sure what I wanted to do. And I stopped practicing for a while. And one day Angela texted me, she was like, will you please just come to my house and do one of these classes with Annie Carpenter with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. I did. And that reinvigorated my practice. So a big shout out to Angela. Yeah, she's a good student, huh? Yeah.
She's awesome.
Yeah, she's fantastic. So Annie, how's your time in Wilmington so far?
Well, it's very hot.
It is very hot. It's like crazy hot.
So other than the heat wave and the humidity, it's beautiful. And I have to say, the Longwave Yoga community is very sweet, very, very dedicated, and really keen and earnestness are my favorite qualities for a yoga practitioner.
Yeah.
Is to be keen to learn and earnest about really being willing to look at what's working in their practice, what they can't see in their practice, and maybe what they need to work on without being judging. There's always something that we need to work on, but it doesn't mean there's something wrong with us.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's been interesting practicing with you in real life because I practice with you on Glow often. And I just, for example, hugging the outer hips in, the whole time I thought I've been doing it. Until you came up to me and I was like, oh, shoot, that's what she means? So it's just interesting to experience it. But I do have to agree about the Wilmington yoga community. It's a small town with a really incredible group of people. I'm really thankful to be a part of it. One of the things that I initially noticed, and I know you don't know this about me because we just met, but I've been a teacher, not of yoga, but of English for the last 11 years at the university level. And of course, now I teach yoga. And for me, I have felt that the role of the teacher in the academic setting and maybe even the yoga setting has shifted in the last few years. So for example, I was interviewing for a new position at the university here, and rather than referring to the students as students, they were referring to them as customers. And yeah, it was kind of scary. And they were asking me, how I felt about customer service. And even in the yoga community, sometimes I feel like we're calling our students clients. But what I really like today is, and yesterday too, is I felt like a student and you felt like a teacher. And I'm wondering if you could speak about the role of the teacher in the yoga practice.
Yeah, it's a little complex, and I think a new teacher probably feels a little bit like a friend. And very, very often I think new teachers get their friends to come to practice with them as they're learning their craft, and that's lovely. But as you become a more advanced teacher and are a true teacher to your students, you kind of have to drop the "they're my friends" thing away.
Yeah.
If I want to be able to be honest to each and every one of my students in the sense of being willing to look at them in the eyes and say, you may think this piece is awake, but it's actually not. And really cut through the stuff. And I'm not saying our friends don't support and love us and try to be honest.
Sure.
But I think it's important for me to not be your friend and chummy, but rather to have the kind of an intimacy that is utterly honest. And it is my job to know when I might give you too much, how slowly to move in with time to wake up, or in which ways you, for example, may be ready to awaken to what is real. And I mean that, yes, is your knee bending when it's supposed to be straight, or am I avoiding what my true work is? Am I awake to what is the difference between the phenomenological, I didn't say that well.
I thought it was amazing.
That part of the world that's ever changing, and that part of the world that is actually true and real and lasting.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that is what the yoga practice about, is knowing what's real.
Yeah. And for me, the yesterday and today, and I'm sure tomorrow too, it felt good to be in the role of the student. And I felt like I wanted to work harder in ways that people haven't asked me to in a while, and part of it is because I think, you work with one person and they lead you to a certain point, and then maybe it's, your work with that person has not, I don't want to say ended, but it's just shifted, and so I'm not like re-inspired or asked to do more. But also because we don't have another relationship. You're not my friend here, you know what I mean? You're not my boss at the studio. And so really, it's just been a really nice experience to just want to work in the yoga practice. Like today you came over and pinched my thigh and I was like, oh my God, I don't think I've ever used my quadricep in Trikonasana before. And now this is like not as fun, but it feels nice, So it's pretty interesting. So that is definitely something I've been grateful for this weekend. I also wanted to know, because I know we're on a little bit of a time limit here because it is a weekend workshop and you have some things to do, but before we do have to rush away, I wanted to ask you a few questions about your experience working with Martha Graham, because I am a dancer, not a professional one, flat feet, big hips, all those things didn't work out for me in the dance world. But I'm really curious to know how Martha Graham influenced the way in which you teach yoga.
Well, as you said, I am a little bit of an insistent teacher. I have a part of me that wants you to see, again, what's awake and what's asleep. And I'm really willing to say, hey, wake up. Hey, again, wake up. And that's how Martha was. She didn't settle for anything but 100% of your presence. So what was amazing about her is that she wanted 100% of your presence in the work. And in fact, my feeling was that in the whole Graham technique and school and with Martha herself, that it was more about understanding what the work is and being 100% present with the work than it was getting the shapes right. I mean, obviously we worked every day to get the shapes right.
Sure.
But Martha's work was an expression. And her opening sequence that we did every morning, the technique, was called the breathings. And the spine, it was almost like
was that on the floor?
A seated cat and cow work. But it's exactly like we do, the breathings in the cat and cow. And so she said she did yoga. So some of this work really was influenced, but she was so present and so insistent on her own self figuring out what was right. And that's a word that I remember so often, that somehow when she'd watch people work and move and dance and choreograph, she knew in her heart of hearts, that's it. That's what's right. And it wasn't, for me, the learning was not that she knew what was right and I didn't, but that inside of us, we each have an intuitive sense of what's right. And by that I mean what's right in my body, what feels right in this moment, but also perhaps even ethically. And the work is for each one of us to go inside and find what is right in this moment. And so in that way, to get back to the idea of the teacher, it's My insistent for you to wake up and find what's right for you today, not for me to tell you what's right. And to evolve that ongoing inquiry about knowing our own heart's intuition and finding what's right moment by moment by moment, whether you're a performer on stage and needing to be absolutely present in each and every moment, or you're a yogi knowing who you are and how we evolve. It doesn't matter. It's presencing. It's evolving inquiry. Who am I? What do I need? What's right in this moment?
This weekend, it's just been interesting because I have been practicing in a particular way, for quite some time. And you being here is making me work harder in different ways, which I thought I was doing, but I apparently was not. But I definitely feel like as the days have gone on, because as I told Angela when I first took one of your classes, I said, man, she's not afraid of holding a pose, is she? She was like, nope, not at all. But as I've been holding them, I have been sort of witnessing how what is right for my body changes even in that moment.
Absolutely.
And so what felt right in the first breath by, say, breath 30, or what maybe had been 650 today, I don't even know anymore, suddenly right had changed, and many times that meant I had to back off. And for me, that's a pretty big deal because I have a tendency to go a little bit too hard in certain ways. Other ways, I'm a little sleepy in other parts of my body and my life. But
I see that in you.
Yes, for sure. Apparently, I'm very sleepy in my quadriceps, but
very active in your mind.
So active, and my mouth. Angela, I've been like whispering up here. When we came into standing splits today, I was like, Angela, this is your fault. But it's been interesting. And, I also was telling someone before we started today that it's been a long time since I've practiced like this. I usually squeeze in an hour yoga practice like a lot of yogis do, and each day or most days. But even yesterday, coming into Urdhva Dhanurasana and holding it for a while, it's like, gosh, this is hard. I feel like I can't do this. My fifth grade teacher was such a jerk, like my brain was taking me down all these strange things. And it's been a long time since I've experienced sort of that inquiry into the asana practice, because usually it's just been like, get up into my back extension and get back down. So is that part of the reason why you are drawn to holding postures long, or is it more in terms of the physical sense of rightness, if you will?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I don't think the poses really matter. They don't.
Yeah.
But working on some one thing, it could be anything. It could be calligraphy. It could be violin. It's the idea of keeping the mind steady on one point. We call it ekagrata. And so rather than flowing through poses and having them change constantly, which is also an interesting exercise.
Yes.
But being in and being able to focus on ever more subtle things over time. What happens is the mind is able to sense and be with more and more subtle things. So in the beginning, it's straighten your leg. A year later, it's lift the inner knee. A year later is can you move the top of the thigh bone towards the hamstring, but not the bottom of the thigh bone. A year later, is your breath feeding the work into the inner arch? A year later, watch the breath. A year later, watch the mind. A year later, just be.
It's the mind component, that I shouldn't say just me. I think so many yogis find that part to be difficult. But I do feel like in my own practice, things have changed. I told you a little bit about this yesterday, and most people who listen have probably heard me mention this before, but I have a low back injury, and I've spent a lot of time focusing in on my body to protect my back. And I do feel like I'm arriving at a place finally where I can be in the posture and then maybe start to notice the breath now. So hopefully that will continue to evolve.
Ever more subtle things.
Yes, ever more subtle things. But then yesterday, too, I was like, well, apparently I just splay my ribs open. I've been joking for years and years. It's not even a joke because it's true. Every ballet teacher, every modern dance teacher, every yoga teacher I've ever had has come by and pushed my ribs in and down. And that's the first thing you did in our first practice together. I was like, oh, here we are again. So maybe I still have a little bit more work to do in that regard. So also, can you share with us a little bit about SmartFLOW Yoga? I think a lot of us who've been in the workshop, we have, of course, experienced a lot of it today, but there's a lot of folks listening because we're now downloaded in 37 countries. So
Wow.
yeah, I know, kind of cool. So maybe a few folks who are listening haven't heard of SmartFLOW yet. Can you tell us about it?
So I evolved SmartFLOW to use the principles of yoga philosophy and put the principles of yoga philosophy so we could, do you know the word grok?
No.
The word grok is from the 60s. Grok means to experience fully in such a way that you understand it viscerally as well as emotionally as well as psychologically. So it's to really know something from the inside out. So one of the most important things in yoga is the concepts of abhyasa, which means to show up, to do, to activate, to practice. And its sister, Vairagya, not Viagra.
Not to be confused. They're very different.
Vairagya. And Vairagya means, in a word, don't attach to the outcome. And this is the lesson of the Bhagavad Gita, those of you who've read the Gita, hopefully, many times. The idea is that we all have a dharma. We all have something that we need to show up for and do. And so the practices we choose to do, whether for you that's meditation or pure asana or breathing practices, any practice, then that practice we need to show up for it on a regular basis so that we can continue to demand of ourselves to be present to our work. On the other side, and this is a good way to think of it as a bird having two wings. The two wings need to flap evenly at the same pace or rhythm, or the bird flies off into Never Never Land.
Yeah.
So the other wing is that wing, yes, I'm showing up no matter if I ever arrive. No matter if it goes well today, it doesn't go well today. No matter what anyone else thinks, no matter if there's never progress, I show up continually. And as those two wings, the abhyasa practice, vairagya, no matter what, come into more and more steady rhythm, then the work becomes effortless. And so in SmartFLOW Yoga, we have equal emphasis on moving into a pose as moving out of that same pose. We activate the body towards an advanced expression without forgetting what it's like to return to center, away from that. And so all of the primary movement continuums, directions of movement that the body can move in and out of, are called movement principles. And there's a family of poses that belong to each of the movement principles. There are 9 primary movement principles. And so we learn the movement principle rather than the pose. So we teach the body how to explore towards an advanced expression and return back away from it to center. And then as we learn each movement principle, the poses that employ that principle, we play with them together. So not only do we learn how to move from a beginning expression towards a more advanced safely because we have a return to center, but it also informs us how to create a sequence. Because if we work, generally speaking, on all of the poses belonging to a family of a particular movement principle, then we know how to make a class, any sequence, belong. We keep playing with the same work in more and more advanced ways. So the emphasis is not on getting anywhere, but finding balance. And we tie the asana to the philosophy.
And I felt over the last 2 days practicing with you, there wasn't anything we did that I've never tried before, but I experienced it so differently in some of the, actually I shouldn't say some, all of them. And I think it is that sort of that effort and return at that simultaneous moment, you know? Yes. So Urdhva Dhanurasana is the big one for me because I can crank myself into a back bend if I have to. That's why I have a back injury, and it doesn't always feel bad. But you use the example of the belay in the front of the body, which was hilarious when you asked if there were rock climbers, because we're all here on the coast of North Carolina,
There's no rocks.
not a single, not hardly any gravel. There's like nothing. And everyone just sat there like, oh no. But we do have a rock wall at the gym over here.
That'll do.
Yep, that'll do. And you can get belay certified. And that was a whole different experience for me. And even though my back extension wasn't as, quote, big, right? And it wasn't as sensational, because the term sensation junkie, which Angela affectionately reminds me all the time that I am one, it felt really controlled, but equally as beneficial in my body. Well, not equally, I should say more beneficial in my body. It was really nice to experience that.
Mm-hmm. And you didn't wake up this morning with back pain, did you?
Not at all. Yeah. Though my triceps are unbelievably sore. Apparently I don't use them ever. Even today in the twist, I was like, why do my triceps hurt so bad twisting?
It's a straight arm.
I know. It was a very straight arm. So in terms of the SmartFLOW practice, how did you arrive to this methodology? What brought you to the yoga practice, and how did you end up? I know we're not supposed to want to land anywhere in the yoga practice, but how did you land here in SmartFLOW Yoga?
I growing up as a dancer, and actually I was kind of an athlete as a little kid, I was really good at pushing to the edge. And I frankly didn't have that many injuries, but there was some sort of psychic and physical, like nervous system physical fatigue that over the many years of really pushing to the edge again and again and again. And I couldn't identify it. I didn't know what it was. I just had this deep inner fatigue, in my late 20s. And so I was already doing both dance and yoga. And so then I just started doing more and more yoga over the years, and restorative work, certainly shavasana. I fell in love with pranayama in my early 20s, which I think most people don't get to that till they're later. But what I started to find was that it was as important to pull back as it was to push forward. So it was a really primitive understanding of abhyasa vairagya, because I was depleting myself in a deep level in my nervous system. And so I said, okay, there clearly has to be a balance here. And I'm hypermobile, so I had to learn how to pull back from going to extreme expressions of poses, whether that was a dance position or a yoga pose. And so everything in the universe kept saying, maybe that's too much, Annie.
How old were you? I feel like this is something people, when they're young, don't recognize.
Oh, I just think I'd pushed so hard.
There's no other choice.
That I just was against the wall. And if I didn't learn to turn around, God knows, I probably would have killed myself in some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So I had to turn it around. I had to say, first, it is enough. And then, enough is enough, Annie. And then, oh, what does balance really mean? And so it's just been an ongoing self-inquiry into what's too far, what's enough, what's not enough, what's nothing look like. Because nothing feels like depression to me, because I'm such an active, physical person. Right. So I couldn't just fall. That was scary. But I had to be more comfortable with something closer to nothingness, or shall we just say stillness, effortlessness, right? And to me, that felt dark and scary. And so I had to learn to let all my let's do, more, go to that, for me, again, shadow side of maybe emptiness, nothingness, quiet, stillness, dark is okay. And as I slowly experimented with that, I began to find the balance and saw it all as this beautiful continuum. Not as right, wrong, not as light, dark, not as good, bad, but as an exploration back and forth. And for each day and for each activity and for each relationship, I had to find that balance. And so when I get on the mat, when I sit on my meditation cushion, that's my work. Does it need to be more inhale today? Or does it need to be more exhale today? And what about the gap in between? And there's my truth. It keeps changing, and I stay with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part is that it changes. And that's definitely something that I struggle with, maybe my personality type. And I even think our Western drive to continually do, at least in the circles I run with, there's a lot of doing all the time. And like there's always something better to achieve out there and something greater than what we have right now. And I think that's what I've enjoyed so much over the last 2 days practicing with you is that effort in return and experiencing, okay, so my tricep hurts in this. What can I do to be here in this experience, but also alleviate that, but without losing the posture? It's been an interesting exploration for me, for sure.
I think what you're talking about is what I might describe as sustaining presence. And sustaining presence often can't be maximum expression. So, but how do I express what I'm doing so that it feels full, like 100%? But can the 100% be about you being present in the moment rather than maximum do or maximum undo? Also can be deeply fatiguing.
I have a tendency for both. I can do one or the other really well.
The extremes.
Yes, it's definitely something, not just in yoga, just in life in general, for sure.
That's why we do yoga.
Right, because it's just a metaphor for all the other things in our lives,
That's
for
right.
sure.
The big mirror.
Yeah, it's like a funhouse mirror sometimes. I'm like, what am I looking at right now? It's definitely been an experience for sure. Annie, I know that we have a little bit of a press time because you are only here for a short amount of time and you have some things going on this evening. Is there anything else that you want to share about SmartFLOW Yoga or your experiences coming to the yoga practice?
Yeah, just in closing, I think I'd say that I'm really grateful for the capacity for all of us to continue to pause and open our minds and really feel what is. Because it's so easy to arrive at a place in all forms of life, of living, and say, oh, I understand, I got this. And it feels right and it's good, and just stay there. And that's not living. To me, where I am right now, I'm certainly very happy in my life and feel blessed and grateful, but I could never have predicted 40 years ago, 30 years ago, a year ago, for example, you and I would be sitting
right
in Wilmington, North Carolina at, what's the studio called?
Longwave Yoga.
Beautiful studio. Chatting. But I think for most of us, if we're continually doing self-inquiry, asking what matters, asking what helps keep me present, then we look back and we go, of course I'm here. Of course, this is the absolute perfect place for me to be. And we can only hope that we continue to recognize that, because then we trust the path of self-inquiry, ever evolving, ever presencing, not present period, but presencing, ongoing, to be exactly where we need to be.
One of the things that I find the most interesting as I have ventured into my yogic path is that I think yogis talk about this a lot, but we've always been on the path. But sometimes I look back and I think, man, like I was really on the path. I wasn't doing yoga, but all my graduate work, in graduate school, it was about the union of dichotomies. It was about finding oneness and what that means culturally. And I look at all these books that I read and they were about all of these things. And so it's nice to be in the yoga practice and see that, sure, of course, this is where I landed. Of course, this is where I am. But then now that I'm here, like you called it, to be presencing with that. I had this, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Kalapurnata, in the fullness of time, recognizing the past. Here we are in the present, and then being so present with it to see how that can drive us forward. It's pretty exciting.
Life is good.
It is good, isn't it? It's really exciting.
Absolutely.
So one thing that I like to do on Dharma Drops is a reminder that, of course, we can hold yoga in our hearts and we can live our lives with yoga, but there's a big world out there full of really fun things. And I know that you're a bird watcher.
Yes.
And so can we just chat for a minute about birds? And so have you always been a bird watcher, or is this something that arrived later? How did you get there?
When I was a teenager in high school, I was blessed to go to this open high school thing where we got to sort of create our own programs. And I was really into science then. And my science teacher turned out was a beekeeper and a bird watcher.
Oh, cool.
George.
George.
Love George. And so he said, well, we could design a science class around bird watching. And we all rolled our eyes and said, whatever. So I'll never forget. So we did some bird watching, and we, got out our Audubon books and all of that, and talked about how dinosaurs evolved into birds, all that sort of research stuff. And then one night, he said, okay, we're meeting at the Newport News Park, and we're going to get in our kayaks, and we're going to go way out deep in the marshes, because I'm hoping we're going to be able to see a prothonotary warbler.
What is that?
That is a very small, bright yellow bird that is in very few places. There are not too many of them left, sadly.
Oh.
And you have to kind of go deep into the marshlands where it's really quiet and safe for birds. And we went out, and we didn't think we were going to see one. It was crack of dawn, and I'm a teenager. Crack of dawn and teenagers,
Not happening.
But we loved George. I think there was 3 or 4 of us who went with him. And so there we were, and then he heard, and it has this 4 very sweet flute-like whistle, same tone. I can't do it. My whistle's dry. Really sweet. And then we turned the corner, and we took up our binoculars, and there it was. And the sun was shining on it. You may not know this about birds, but there's the color of the feathers, but there's also a reflective, radiating color.
I didn't know that.
That, like, if you've seen a hummingbird and you see it in the shadow in that ruby red throat, you don't see anything but dark. But when the light hits it, it reflects the light, and it's a very bright, bright red. And the same with this bird. In the light, it was just like a shining golden yellow. It was a miracle, this tiny little bird. And from that moment on,
You were a bird watcher.
I'm a birder. Now, mind you, there's many years I lived in New York, so much of my birding was pigeons. Few seagulls. But 4 years ago, we moved up to the Bay Area, and we're in the East Bay, and there's actually quite a bit of good birding there. So I've rekindled my love, and now when I travel, I take my binoculars, and I try to find a local guide and go birding.
That's awesome. And you did a little birding here in Wilmington, yeah?
I did.
Yeah, did you see anything good?
Yes, in the Arley Gardens, we saw a lot of egrets and herons. And things, but I also saw an anhinga.
I don't think I know. Oh, wait, I think maybe you told me about this. Is this the one whose feathers don't have oil on them?
Correct.
Yeah, oh, can you tell me one more time? Because my impersonation is probably not very great over here.
So the anhinga is a similar family to the cormorants. And they are these beautiful birds that ride low in the water, and they dive deep into the water to go fishing to get their food. And unlike ducks, which have a lot of oil in their feathering, and so their feathers don't get soaked, they don't have that. So once they've done their fishing and had their dinner, they sit up on a branch low close to the water, and they spread their wings out really wide. And the sun dries out their feathers. So you'll often see these birds. Cormorants are pure black, where the anhinga have a sort of white, flecked, beautiful pattern on the backs of their wings. Long necks, long beaks, and they're just beautiful birds. And you don't see them in too many places.
Cool. I didn't know we were so lucky to have them. Angela told me, she said she's going to reference birds a lot. And we stretch our arms out. She's like, do you know what a California condor is? And Angela and I, we looked at each other. I was like, oh gosh, here we go. It's hilarious.
They have a very big wingspan.
Yeah, apparently we do too. Yeah. It's awesome. I don't have a ton of experience with birds. Right now, my birding experience is getting the squirrels off of my bird feeder. That's the lifelong.
That's a start.
It's a start. I actually kind of like the squirrels. They're kind of cute. They're kind of funny, you know. So, Annie, I think we have to go because you have food to eat soon, yes? Thank you so much for being here and for being on Dharma Drops podcast and giving the listeners across the world a chance just to hear a little information, insight from you.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And if folks want to find you, is there anywhere they can catch up with you on social media?
Yes, Annie Carpenter SmartFLOW on Instagram, and my website is anniecarpenter.com.
Awesome. And you're on Glow teaching classes.
Yes, come find me on Glow. There's great classes there and some trainings as too.
Tie your bows, the one.
Ooh, that's a hard one.
It is
like
a hard one. Yes, I did tie your bow the other day, and then the next day I was like, oh my God, my legs hurt so bad. It's that bound extended side angle. It's like, how long will we be here? It's a good one. Good. You know, one other thing before we part ways, Annie, that I just wanted to share with you that I almost forgot. So I've been working on my forearm stand for for years, and it was actually in one of your glow classes, the series you have for teachers, the forearm stand. And I don't know what happened, but putting my thumbs on the block worked, and I went up, and it scared me so bad because I actually did it at the top of my lungs. I screamed, "Oh shit!" And then I just sat there in silence, and I was like, I can't believe I'm here.
Balancing in the pose.
Yes, I know. I was like totally scared and excited and cussing and all kind of crying because it was it's like all these.
That's all presencing.
Yes, it is all presencing, but just a special thanks for that one because that was an exciting one. Not that I'm attached to it.
Me.
Yes, of course. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here and listening to this special episode of Dharma Drops podcast. We got to take Annie to go get some dinner.
Namaste.
Namaste, guys. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Dharma Drops, and a big special shout out once again to Annie Carpenter for being on the show, and to Longwave Yoga in Wilmington, North Carolina for hosting the workshop and providing the space for us to record in a sort of impromptu kind of manner. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, you can find me at Rebecca Warfield Yoga and at Dharma Drops Podcast. And you can keep up with all of my shenanigans at RebeccaWarfield.com, or if you want to get fancy with it, you can type in dharmadropspodcast.com, but little secret, it just takes you to the same place. It's like magic. In any case, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on whatever app you're listening on. And until we meet again next time, thanks so much for listening. Bye, guys.